Have you ever listened to official statements on foreign policy and just felt that they sound a little too neat, a little too perfect? Well, today we're diving into a really powerful argument that what we often hear isn't real strategy at all, but something else entirely, what our source calls the mirage of strategic reassurance.
That's a pretty compelling phrase, right? But what does it actually mean? Before we can really get into the nitty-gritty of policy towards, say, India or the US, we've got to wrap our heads around this key idea first. So let's ask, what is strategic reassurance?
Well, the critique we're looking at gives it a pretty blunt name, establishment reassurance. Think of it like this. It's a story, a narrative that's been expertly crafted to sound strong, to sound strategic. But its real job, its main purpose, is to help everyone avoid talking about the really, really hard truths. So how does this actually play out in the real world? Let's take a look.
It turns out, to really understand this reassuring story, you have to start with the person telling it. The critique we're exploring kicks things off by putting the author of the original piece right under the microscope.
So the author we're talking about is Aizaz Ahmad Chaudhry, and his background is absolutely central to this whole analysis. We're talking about a former foreign secretary, the current head of a think tank. He's a career insider. The source calls him a custodian of official narratives. Now, the point here isn't personal. It's all about context. The argument is that his entire point of view is inevitably shaped by a career spent defending the official line.
And this brings us to a really sharp kind of cutting phrase from the critique. It says what we're getting here isn't some independent, outside-the-box strategic thinking. No, it has a specific name for it, retired state realism. It's the worldview from inside the machine, a perspective that, just by its very nature, is way more likely to reassure than it is to radically question anything.
Okay, so how does this theory of reassurance hold up with a real-world example? Let's dive into the first major policy area the critique tackles, India. The argument here is that the official narrative is this weird cocktail of inflating the threat on one hand and just pure wishful thinking on the other.
Just look at this contrast. On one side, you have the reassuring story, India is isolated, it's weak. Sounds good, right? But then comes the reality check, and it is brutal. The critique basically says, India acts based on its own domestic political needs, not what the rest of the world thinks. And to believe otherwise, well, that's dismissed as just strategic naivety.
Here's another perfect example. When it comes to the supercritical issue of water rights, the official reassurance is a very strong, very clear line in the sand. Messing with the rivers would be seen as an act of war. It sounds powerful, decisive, no nonsense.
But the critique's response? It's just two words: empty deterrence. The argument is that this tough talk doesn't really mean anything, because India is already chipping away at the treaty, not with some big dramatic invasion, but slowly, quietly, through legal challenges and delays. The strong words just don't match the quiet strategic reality that's already happening.
Okay, so from a regional rival, let's pivot to global partners. Section 3 gives us a serious reality check on Pakistan's key relationships, contrasting that official story of having all this leverage with the harsh, practical limits of these partnerships.
And you see this exact same pattern again. With the USA, the official story is that it's a beneficial relationship, but the critique says the upside is overstated. With China, that comfortable label of a time-tested partner is seen as a way to avoid talking about some very real risks. And with Saudi Arabia, a supposed defense pact that provides deterrence is flatly dismissed as a deterrence fantasy.
Next up, the analysis zooms in on the immediate neighborhood, and it asks a really sharp question about the regional policy. Is it actually a forward-thinking strategy, or is it just damage control?
Take a look at the Afghanistan policy. The official line talks about this multi-pronged strategy that's putting pressure on the Taliban, but the source delivers a really stark counterpoint. Pakistan has no real leverage that doesn't also end up hurting itself. Any pressure it tries to apply at the border, with the economy, it boomerangs. So it's not a strategy, it's just damage control. Now, what about the economy? Here, the reassurance narrative says the problem is all about geography. The story goes that east-west trade is blocked by India, but hey, the north-south route is getting better. See how it frames the problem as an external one? It's about maps and geopolitics.
But the critique argues this completely, totally misses the real point. The issue isn't the map, it's what's happening at home. You can have all the geographic potential in the world, but it means absolutely nothing without stable, credible institutions. And this leads to another one of those killer phrases. You can build all the corridors you want, but without trust, all you get are corridors without commerce.
And this, right here, brings us to the most critical part of the entire analysis. The source argues that all of these external policy issues, they're just symptoms of a much deeper problem. A problem that the official reassurance story conveniently and completely ignores. So what is it? What's the one big thing that connects all of these different challenges, from India to the economy, that the reassurance narrative is so carefully built to sidestep?
According to this critique, the official narrative avoids the most fundamental questions about how the country is actually run. It talks about stability, sure, but not how you achieve it. It demands policy continuity, but doesn't ask who is supposed to ensure it. And it calls for the rule of law, but it never ever asks why that law is so often applied selectively.
And this all builds to the core thesis of the entire piece, the one sentence that really connects everything we've talked about. Foreign policy cannot outperform domestic legitimacy. In other words, you can't fix a cracked foundation at home with a new coat of paint on the outside. It's just not possible.
So let's pull all of this together. Let's get to the final, unvarnished verdict. Why does any of this matter? Why is it so important to tell the difference between real strategy and simple reassurance?
So in the end, what is establishment reassurance? The source basically argues it's a comfort blanket for the status quo. Its whole job is to make threats seem simpler than they are, to exaggerate the country's leverage, to romanticize its partnerships, and this is the most crucial part, to politely look the other way when it comes to the internal weaknesses that are the real source of the problem.
And the final warning from this critique is a stark one. A foreign policy that's built on comforting stories instead of hard, messy realities might feel good for a while, but it's fundamentally brittle. It's designed to collapse the very moment its deterrence is actually put to the test. A truly sobering thought to end on.